Hello! Thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch this presentation. My name is Kendra and I'm a registered psychotherapist. I've been working with parents and children for over 12 years in primary healthcare and private practice. My work has set me on a path to learn more about what's happening in the human brain. I'm a peaceful parent coach and trained in understanding the brain-body connection. Now, most of my work is with parents to share my learning and teach them how to support their children in a way that many of us weren't parented as children ourselves. In their book, Hold On to Your Kids, Dr. Mattei and Dr. Neufeld stress the importance of why parents need to matter more than peers. They believe that peer orientation is eroding parents' attachment with their children. And so, the authors encourage that our top priority is the task of collecting our kids on a daily basis. Collecting means drawing them under your wing, making them want to belong to you and with you. Child collecting instincts come naturally with babies and younger children. Smiling, nods, big eyes, and cooing sounds. These steps are innate to us, but we lose these instincts because they're no longer triggered with children past infancy. This webinar is going to focus on the brain changes that are occurring and provide you with some tips and tricks on how to parent your way through it. Please note I will be referring to the average teen, not those who are neurodiverse, have learning disabilities, or who have experienced trauma. These tips and tricks won't hurt, but you know your child the best. Adolescence is a scientific term referring to the period of development occurring before becoming an adult. The period of adolescence is often marked by the onset of puberty, but the brain is undergoing major renovations before the physical signs of puberty become apparent, and it continues to change even after we finish the physical changes. Adolescence runs roughly between the ages of 10 and 24. Yes, into our mid-20s when the neurological brain changes are finally complete. Adolescence is as much a perplexing time of life as it is an amazing one for both adolescents and the adults who support them. You may be surprised to be hearing that adolescence begins around ages 10 and 11. Many parents are baffled when their 5th or 6th grader starts to display behavior that they expected from a teen, like the extinguishment of cuddling, the desire for more privacy, or bristling at any terms of endearment that used to be tolerated. The term teenager refers to the age group between 13 and 19, and for the purpose of this webinar, I'm going to use the term teen or teenager to identify and include tweens or preteens who are between the ages of 10 and 12. The starting point for this webinar is a little science lesson. Trust me, it will help with the overall understanding as we go along, so please bear with me. The prefrontal cortex sits just behind the forehead. It's often called the smart part, decision-making part, or director or CEO of the brain, and it controls the thinking, planning, working memory, organizing, cause and effect. As the prefrontal cortex matures, we can reason better, develop more control over impulses, and make better judgments. In an infant, the brain overproduces brain cells, which are called neurons, and the connections between those brain cells, the synapses. And then the brain starts pruning them back around the age of 3. The process of pruning is much like pruning a tree. By cutting back weak branches, others flourish. Pruning allows the brain to consolidate learning by pruning away unused connections in the thinking and processing part of your child's brain, and then wrapping white matter or myelin around the other connections to stabilize and strengthen them. The second wave of synapse production in the frontal cortex occurs just before puberty, age 11 in girls, 12 in boys, and then a pruning back in adolescence. Adolescence is a time of significant growth and development inside the brain. Although we develop new neurons throughout our lives, adolescents form them at a rate 4 to 5 times that of adults. And the pruning during adolescence is occurring at a pace that is unmatched in any other point in our lives. The growth and pruning process is a particularly important stage of brain development because what teens do or don't do can affect them for the rest of their lives. This is the brain's way of becoming more efficient, based on the use it or lose it principle. So, for example, if a teen is engaged in music, sports, or academics, those are the cells and connections that will be hardwired. If they're lying around on the couch or playing video games, those are the cells and connections that are going to survive. This pruning process begins in the back of the brain, and so the prefrontal cortex is remodeled last. Consequently, adolescents might instead rely on their limbic system, which is associated with emotions, impulses, aggression, and instinctive behavior, to make decisions and solve problems. Have you noticed that sometimes your child's thinking and behavior seem quite mature, but at other times your child seems to behave or think in illogical, impulsive, or emotional ways? That back-to-front development of the brain explains these shifts and changes. Teenagers are working with brains that are still under construction. For years, the teenage brain was seen by researchers, policymakers, and the public as more of a burden than an asset. Teenagers were risk machines who lacked the decision-making powers of a fully developed prefrontal cortex, and so they were liable to harm themselves and others as a result. However, that narrative is beginning to change. One of the most powerful myths is that raging hormones cause teenagers to go mad or lose their minds. That's simply false. Hormones do increase during this period, but it is not the hormones that determine what goes on in adolescence. We now know that what teens experience is primarily the result of changes in the development of the brain. Knowing about these changes can help life flow more smoothly for you as a teen or for you as an adult with adolescence in your world. Another myth is that adolescence is simply a time of immaturity and teens just need to grow up. With such a restricted view of the situation, it's no surprise that adolescence is seen as something that everyone just needs to endure, to somehow survive and leave behind with as few battle scars as possible. Yes, being a teen can be confusing and terrifying, as so many things during this time are new and often intense. And for adults, what teens do may seem surprising and even senseless. But to the contrary, teenagers don't just need to survive adolescence, they can thrive during this important period of their lives. A third myth is that growing up during adolescence requires moving from dependence on adults to total independence from them. While there is a natural and necessary push towards independence from the adults who raised us, teens still benefit from relationships with adults. The healthy move to adulthood is toward interdependence, not complete do-it-yourself isolation. The nature of the bonds that teens have with their parents as attachment figures changes, and friends do become more important during this period. Ultimately, we learn to move from needing others' care during childhood to pushing away from our parents and other adults and leaning more on our peers, to then both giving and receiving help from others. That's interdependence. Somewhere along the line, we became afraid of being unhappy. The proliferation of safe and effective medication to treat depression, reduce anxiety, improve sleep, and assist with focus and attention has altered our cultural stance towards emotional discomfort. Instead of regarding psychological unease as something to be explored and understood, we have increasingly come to view emotional pain as something that can be deterred or contained with chemical intervention. To be clear, there is no question that psychiatric drugs aid in human suffering. Further, medications aren't prescribed with the promise that they're going to solve life's problems and make everybody happy. That being said, has the widespread use of mood-altering drugs created a belief that we and our children should be spared the reality that being human comes with feeling emotional pain? Emotional intensity usually peaks around the ages of 13-14 and then slowly tapers down from there. Although the brain is not fully developed until about 24, it doesn't mean that adolescents will be acting like a teenager until then. Adolescents become impressively mature long before young adulthood. The sophisticated regions of the brain are developing, they're just lagging a bit behind. Although the brain is not fully developed, they still have highly developed brains. The only issue is that the prefrontal cortex of the brain won't hit full strength until they're young adults, and so their ability to maintain a sense of perspective may sometimes be knocked offline if they're having a highly charged emotional reaction. It's also important to remind ourselves that if we parents are feeling worried or perplexed by our teenagers' emotions, our teenagers are just as freaked out by their meltdowns. Unfortunately, what others believe about us can shape how we see ourselves and how we behave. This is especially true when it comes to teens and how they receive commonly held negative attitudes that many adults project, whether directly or indirectly, that teens are out of control or lazy or unfocused. Studies show that when teachers were told that certain students had limited intelligence, these students performed worse than other students whose teachers were not similarly informed. But when these teachers were informed that these same students had exceptional abilities, the students showed marked improvements in their test scores. Adolescents who are absorbing negative messages about who they are and what is expected of them may sink to that level instead of realizing their true potential. According to Dr. Dan Siegel, brain changes during the early teen years set up 4 qualities of our minds during adolescence: novelty seeking, social engagement, increased emotional intensity, and creative exploration. There are changes in the fundamental circuits of the brain that make the adolescent period different from childhood. These changes affect how teens seek rewards in trying new things, connect with their peers in different ways, feel more intense emotions, and push back on the existing ways of doing things to create new ways of being in the world. Yes, there are positives and negative possibilities to these qualities. Novelty seeking emerges from an increased drive for rewards and an inner motivation to try something new and feel life more fully. The downside is that sensation seeking and risk taking exaggerates the thrill and downplays the risk, which can result in dangerous behaviors and injury. Impulsivity can turn an idea into an action without a pause to think about the consequences. The upside is that being open to change and living passionately emerges, which creates a fascination for life and a drive to design new ways of doing things and living with a sense of adventure. Social engagement enhances peer connectedness and creates new friendships. The downside is that teens isolate from adults and surround themselves by other teens who have increased risk-taking behavior, and the total rejection of adult knowledge and reasoning increases those risks. The upside is that the drive for social connection leads to supportive relationships that are best predictors of well-being, longevity, and happiness throughout the lifespan. Increased emotional intensity gives an enhanced vitality to life. The downside is that intense emotion may rule the day, leading to impulsivity, moodiness, and extreme, sometimes unhelpful reactivity. The upside is that life lived with emotional intensity can be filled with energy and a sense of drive that gives a zest for being alive. Creative exploration leads to an expanded sense of consciousness. An adolescent's new conceptual thinking and abstract reasoning allow questioning of the status quo, approaching problems with out-of-the-box strategies, the creation of new ideas, and the emergence of innovation. The downside is searching for the meaning of life during the teen years can lead to a crisis of identity, vulnerability to peer pressure, and a lack of direction and purpose. The upside is that if the mind can hold on to the thinking and imagining and perceiving the world in new ways within consciousness, the sense of being in a rut that can sometimes pervade adult life can be minimized, and instead an experience of the ordinary being extraordinary can be cultivated. Not a bad strategy for living a full life. I'm sure you know adults in your life who describe feelings of being stuck or empty, or have lost their novelty-seeking drive and are filled with the boredom of just doing the same old things over and over again. They also find their lives filled with a lack of social connectedness. They feel isolated and alone, and for many, life has lost its emotional intensity. Things feel lackluster or even boring. When adults lose these 4 distinguishing features of adolescence, life can become boring, isolating, dull, and routine. Who would intentionally choose to live life like that? Most likely no one, but it happens all the time. It seems we adults are prone to just cruise on autopilot. Why? It can be difficult coping with life circumstances, to face the world's stresses. Sometimes it's easier to just shut down these essential aspects of a vital life that come during adolescence and instead try and stay in survival mode as we develop a routine we can rely on to function. But allowing ourselves to lose our vitality will only make life harder, and it also can lead to not keeping the brain as strong as it could be as we age. So what adolescents have going for them, despite being both a challenge and a gift, is actually what adults need in order to maintain vitality in their lives. The good news is that adolescence doesn't have to be a war between the generations. If adults try to block the flow of adolescence, it's likely that communication will be tainted with tension and disrespect. Disconnection, secrecy, isolation, and many other negative and hurtful social responses can occur. But if the adult who once was an adolescent can recognize these important brain changes and learn to navigate these years constructively and collaboratively in order to keep communication open, it will optimize life for everyone and aim to avoid tragic endings of risky behaviors. The challenge is not easy. It's a balancing act for adolescents and adults. Parenting differs from parent to parent and from family to family and child to child. It depends on many factors, including how each parent's parents raised them. A lot of times, parents raise their children how they were raised. Research conducted in the 1960s uncovered 4 parenting styles as observed in this visual. In the authoritarian style of parenting, children are expected to follow their parents' rules. The parent's word is law. Authoritarian parents love and care about their children, but they show less warmth and affection. Their demands for maturity and control are high. When children don't follow the rules, it results in consequences and strict punishment. Authoritarian parents typically do not explain the reasoning behind the rules. The parent's reply to questioning would be something like, "Because I said so." Authoritarian parents expect their orders to be obeyed without explanation. They expect to be respected. The uninvolved parenting style is characterized by few demands, low responsiveness, and little communication. Uninvolved parents fulfill the child's basic needs, but they're usually detached from the child's life. In extreme cases, uninvolved parents might reject or neglect the needs of their children, such as academic, social, emotional, or behavioral. Uninvolved parenting emphasizes learning through experience. These parents believe that you should not shelter your children from lessons that they learn from making mistakes. The permissive style of parenting is currently common today due to busy schedules, two-income families, and a feeling that they just don't get enough quality time with their kids. These parents love their children very much and want to be their friend and not to have to put their foot down and tell them no. They might feel guilty about not having enough time to spend with their children, so the time they do have to spend with them, they don't want to spend it fussing at them. Permissive parents make few demands on their children and discipline is lax. Permissive parents are very accepting and nurturing and communicate well with their children. How do we find balance between our adolescents' personal decisions and our parental regulation or concern? How can we support our adolescent while also allowing them to find their own voices? And how, at the same time, can we set limits and cautions? My answer is structure with empowerment. Science would call this authoritative parenting, an approach filled with warmth, limit setting, and honoring of autonomy in age-appropriate ways, lending support while supporting separation, providing a safe haven while encouraging exploration. Authoritative parents expect a lot from their children, however, they also expect even more from their own behavior. They're willing to say no or to lay down the line, but they are careful to stay calm, kind, and patient, and to empathize with their child's perspective. I refer to this style of parenting as peaceful, based on my training as a peaceful parent coach with Dr. Laura Markham. I've created a webinar called Peaceful Brain Body Parenting, which illustrates this model of parenting in more detail, and I welcome and encourage you to check it out if you're interested in learning more. Attachment style refers to the brain's internal working models about how relationships function. Our attachment pattern influences the way we relate to important people in our lives. The attachments we form in our early relationships with parents and caretakers are influenced by the parenting styles outlined on the previous slide. Attachments can have a serious impact on our feelings of insecurity, anxiety, fear, avoidance, and even satisfaction in close relationships throughout our lives. Attachment research has shown that our attachment style with our own parents is the biggest predictor of the attachment style we'll have with our child. Research has shown there to be 4 different attachment styles. Avoidant children are those who didn't learn that the adult's role is to care for them. The bond of trust didn't develop, probably because parents were emotionally unresponsive, leading them to suppress their own needs and instincts and believe they can only rely on themselves. Disorganized children often display controlling behavior. This could stem from the parent behavior having been so unpredictable in the child's early years they never learned to feel safe. In fact, they may even view their parent as a source of fear rather than comfort. This style can also occur when the child's primary caregiver suddenly disappears. Anxious children are often distrustful of adults. This is because they never learned to predict how adults will respond to their needs. They're more likely to be clingy, seek constant reassurance, be fearful of losing relationships, dependent on others, and have a negative view of self. Secure children know that they can rely on adults to care for them. They're more likely to be content, resilient, comfortable with intimacy, self-sufficient, capable of trust, and have a positive view of themselves and others. I believe this attachment style stems from authoritative parenting. You may recognize these attachment styles in yourself and your children. It's important to know that one person may have multiple models of attachment for each relationship they have had with a caregiver. The setting you're in, how people respond to you, and how people remind you of one of your attachment figures can directly influence which one of the models becomes activated. It's also important to know that you can learn or earn a secure attachment in your adult years. You may be confused as to why I'm discussing parenting strategies that would have already been employed in your earlier days of parenting and attachment styles that will have formed due to the caregiver attachments around us since birth. It is true that the authoritative parenting strategy is most effective when started at a young age. However, if you have not utilized this style of parenting already, coming into adolescence would be a time to consider making the transition, especially knowing the brain changes that are occurring in adolescence. My work with parents has uncovered that our society's belief is that as children grow older, there is less need for our involvement and a push for independence over permissiveness. Also, our culture makes it so parents are less needed by their children. As a result, children are connecting with one another, one underdeveloped prefrontal cortex to another, and this is highly concerning. In fact, parents must act as that substitute prefrontal cortex at least up until the mid-20s when it's fully developed. That might be surprising to you, but adolescence is not the time to promote independence, but rather interdependence. The separation-individuation phase is most accurately described as the developmental phase when parents become totally mortifying and the several months when your teenager cannot stand the way you chew. Whatever it's called, this normal phase of adolescence can be really unpleasant for adults, especially because it comes on the heels of what used to be a friendly relationship between parent and child. Separation involves building an identity that is distinct from that of your parents. This is necessary for healthy adolescent development. During this time, your child may have ideas about what brand they want to build, but they're still young enough that their identity is closely intertwined with their parents, and consequently, it becomes annoying when parents' branding doesn't match with the emerging brand they envision for themselves. So, in reality, this means it's a crisis for a teen to have a mom wear a dumpy outfit in the presence of friends, or a dad who has a crazy dance moves and a corny sense of humor. Individuation is the importance placed on their brands being wholly distinct from their parents. In reality, this means that your teenage son who wants to play baseball for his high school team will not practice with his talented and athletic dad because baseball would not be his thing if he practiced with dad. Combined, separation and individuation amount to a guaranteed no-win situation for parents. As teens are trying to become more separate, they are put off by traits that don't match their emerging brand. And simultaneously, their efforts to establish their own brand cause teens to be annoyed when one of our traits does match their new identity. Therefore, everything we do is annoying. Also important to note, your teenager may be a lot more unpleasant to the same-sex parent. So, for example, it can be harder for girls to feel separate from their moms as they often feel closer to their mothers and more like them. So, they have to push away with more force. Even though teenage behavior is unpleasant, it is typical for their age, and knowing this can make it a lot less personal than it feels. So, what do? As parents, we're usually not okay with being treated disrespectfully, and it's not good for your teen to feel like they can get away with treating anyone badly. Dr. Damore suggests that when your teen is unpleasant, try to engage as little as possible. Or, instead of responding to the rude behavior, you can offer 3 options of how your teen can interact with you. Tell them to be friendly, or to tell you what's wrong in a civil way, or suggest that they ask for space. If you lose your cool, or should I say when you lose your cool and act in a way you regret, my suggestion is always to repair. Own it and apologize. This is an opportunity for you to model how your teen can make things right when they feel bad about their behavior. If your teen later emerges and acts as though nothing has happened, you can revisit the issue and ask them to apologize. However, a forced apology never seems genuine and usually increases hostility towards the parent. Alternatively, you could just enjoy your child and have them enjoy your company when they're in a good mood. The key is to not hold a grudge. Teens' moods change so quickly that it's easy to feel mad at them for something that they've already forgotten. As teens develop their own interests and skills, their independent identities are outlined and filled in, and they develop a healthy sense of standing apart from their parents. As this happens, they find us less embarrassing and become to find our quirks as a problem with our brand and not theirs. Eventually, they can return to sharing interests with us without feeling that it encroaches on the brand identity they have worked hard to develop. When our children are young, they look up to us, but as they age into adolescence, aided by their new neurological power, they start to catch on to our shortcomings. On top of that, the need for separation compels them to see us from a new and removed perspective. I can understand that it's difficult to take our teens' criticism. Here's why it happens. Teenagers become keenly aware of our warts right around the time they're ready to leave home. Consciously or not, they realize that there's not much time left for us to become better parents while they're still under our roof. This is a big issue for them. While they may enjoy support from adults outside the family, they're very much aware that we're the only parent they'll ever have. In time, your kids will do what most people do and come to terms with the fact that there's no perfect parent and find a way to accept our shortcomings. But while they're still living at home, why wouldn't they try to improve the parenting hand they've been dealt? You could, when your teenager points out your imperfections or shortcomings, try to keep an open mind. Adolescent descriptions of adults tend to be pretty spot on. If we can tolerate their feedback, it might help us to grow. You can even ask a kind or clear-eyed partner or friend for a second opinion. Your teen might be telling you something that's worth trying to work on, even if they don't bring it to your attention in the nicest way. Another reason that being an adolescent contributes to more friction at home is because their age-appropriate wish to be more independent causes them to challenge our authority. Teens want to do things we're reluctant to allow, or they will refuse to do things we want them to do. However, it's more concerning when there's no teen-parent friction than when there is, because if everybody's doing their job, teenagers will be pushing for more freedom and flexibility than their parents are inclined to allow. And parents will be pulling back on them, saying no to some requests and enforcing reasonable rules. If you find yourself living with this tension, it usually means that everything is going exactly the way it should. Your teenager might be sure that they can manage themselves at a friend's house where gatherings tend to get wild, whereas parents might feel equally sure that it's going to be a terrible idea. Or your teen might feel that it's not your business if they choose to keep their clothes on the floor of their room, yet your position is that you paid for the clothes and the house that their room is in. As much as we'd rather not get into a standoff, disputes like these are inevitable, and we should treat them as valuable opportunities to teach our teenager how to handle conflict. In fact, research shows that learning to have healthy disagreements at home contributes to a teenager's overall well-being and improves how they manage their relationships with others. So, instead of the goal being to avoid conflicts, let's have constructive ones. And the hallmark of the constructive conflict is that each party tries to view the situation from the other's perspective. Important to note, the capacity to infer what another person might be thinking improves dramatically in adolescence. The ability to stand mentally in someone else's shoes blossoms as a result of a major renovation project underway in the brain. Due to the earlier onset of puberty, girls tend to be ahead of boys in the development of this capacity. For our daughters, this takes place around the age of 13, and for our sons around the age of 15. If you find yourself at odds and in a standoff, you can test your teen's growing cognitive abilities by saying, "Let's do this. I'm going to try to describe the situation from your perspective. When I'm done, you're going to tell me what I'm missing or where I'm off track." As you can probably imagine, it makes a powerful impact on a teenager to hear their parents say something like this: "I'm wondering if you're feeling that you've earned my trust, and I should count on you to make good decisions, even when you're at a house where things get out of hand." Or, "We know how busy you are. Are you feeling like it's not a big deal if your room is messy, given that you're staying on top of everything else?" You can then ask your teenager to do the same for you. If you are sincere and open when it's your turn, it's likely that your teenager will return the favor. My hope is that over time, your teen might come to a place where they would say, "I know that you just want me to be safe, so it's scary for you when I'm at a house where kids get crazy." Or, "When my clothes are all over the floor, it probably seems like I don't appreciate the fact that you buy me nice things." This process helps to build empathy. Appreciating where the other person is coming from also helps by shifting the focus off the people disagreeing and onto the problem that needs solving. This exercise will not magically resolve every dispute, but it will almost always make a resolution easier to achieve. Thanks to the grand renovation project underway in the brain, teens are drawn to novel and exciting experiences. Adolescence involves a rise of the availability of dopamine, a natural chemical associated with those positive feelings that make novel and highly charged experiences especially enjoyable and alluring. The yearning for excitement rises quickly in adolescence, but the capacity for suppressing impulses develops more slowly. Despite the neurological realities of the teenage brain, there's still a lot that parents can do to help keep them out of harm's way. First, you can take advantage of the rational thinking that prevails in adolescence to strategize with them about how they will handle the risks that might arise. For example, when your teen mentions that they have plans to go to a concert with friends, use that time to have them sketch out the tricky situations that could arise and the plans for how they would handle them. Research comparing adolescents around the world has shown that experimenting with alcohol varies widely. Even though teens everywhere have the same risk-prone neurology, much of the variance comes down to the local norms and the kinds of risks that are available. We don't have much control over the conventions of our community, but the second way to keep teens out of harm's way is to ensure that they have appropriate levels of supervision, and by limiting their ability to do dangerous things will make a material difference for their safety. Next, studies have also shown that teenagers benefit from having high standards set for their behavior. Parents who talk openly about risks and articulate and enforce reasonable guidelines for behavior have teenagers who are less likely to drive recklessly, binge drink, try illegal drugs, or engage in unprotected sex. So, adults should let their teens know that they have faith in them and that they are always available to talk to them about the dangers that they might encounter. Furthermore, parents should have clear rules or expectations for how their teens will handle themselves when they're driving, given access to alcohol or drugs, or considering having sex. These conversations go best when they're less about what we want for our teens and more about the priority teens usually have for themselves, such as thriving academically or in their extracurriculars, or simply keeping future doors open by maintaining a clear school and legal record. At the same time, we should have a contingency plan with our teens for the possibility that they may find themselves in a situation that has gotten out of control. Some parents worry that it's a mixed message if we say to our teens, "I don't want you to drink at a party, but if you get yourself into a jam, I'm here to help." Teens by nature can sometimes find themselves in unexpectedly dangerous situations. We are more likely to keep the lines of communication open if we make it clear that we are aware of it too. So we could say something like this: "My hope is that you don't drink, but I'm realistic about the fact that mistakes get made. Nothing matters more than your safety. The easiest way to stay safe is to stay sober, but if that doesn't happen, I'm your safety plan." Next, remember to center any discussion of risky behavior on the topic of safety. Although we have good reasons to talk with teens about what is morally right and the trouble they could get into with the law, our teens may not share our moral stance and may consider the laws regulating drugs or drinking to be nonsensical, and they may feel it's unlikely that they're going to get caught. While supervising adolescents can keep them safe, it would be impossible to try to monitor them all the time. Focusing on safety keeps the emphasis where it belongs. I know you love your child and worry about risky behavior, not because it's wrong, but the bottom line is because it's dangerous. Your commentary can be something like this: "If you're in a tough situation, the last thing I want you to worry about is whether you could get caught. The main thing I want you to worry about is whether you could get hurt." From there, be clear that you will never, under any conditions, make your teen regret asking you for help. Finally, and maybe easier said than done, adults should honor the fact that teenagers are neurologically primed to seek excitement and allow them some carefully chosen opportunities to satisfy those boundary-pushing needs. Teens are built to search out new and exciting experiences, so let them. Some kids travel to unfamiliar parts of town to go thrifting with their friends. Others work on increasingly daring skateboard tricks or get into camping, hiking, climbing, sports, etc. Most teens need to satisfy their appetite for excitement and will do it one way or another. We can't change their desire to take risks, but we can work to keep the lines of communication open about which boundary-pushing behavior we can and can't live with. Much of the research on teens and digital technology is correlational. That means that it can establish a relationship between technology use and adolescent moods, but it can't prove that one of the variables causes the other. A correlation between cell phone use and teen depression could mean that teens who spend a lot of time on their cell phones are more likely to be depressed, or it could mean that teens who become depressed start spending a lot of time on their phones. Or a third factor, a global pandemic, for example, is causing teens to both spend more time on their phones and become more depressed. Nonetheless, there is a reason to think that, for most teenagers, time spent online can be both good and bad. Teens use texting and social media platforms to make meaningful connections, cultivate friendships, and enjoy harmless entertainment. It is also true that many of the same adolescents find the digital technology invites time wasting, unkind behavior, social comparison, and exposure to concerning content. Teens become immediately skeptical when adults try to weigh in on their online pursuits. They do have a good point. Nobody parenting a teen today came of age attached to a device, and regardless of how addicted we are now to our own phones or computers, we do not use technology in the same way our teens do. Adolescents, like the rest of us, are usually reluctant to take advice from anyone who may not know what they're talking about. You might say that teens are likely to receive our guidance on managing their relationships with technology about the same way we would take their guidance on refinancing our mortgage. To account for this, ask a lot of questions, but not all at once. Over time, try to learn what your teenager enjoys most about being online and what's annoying, frustrating, or unsettling. Ask them if there's anything that they've done to try to make the time spent online more positive. And if you're a tech user, talk openly about how you've navigated the same challenges yourself. Another way to minimize the harms of the virtual world is to help your teen understand the algorithm-driven nature of online content. Teens don't always recognize that their online experience is heavily shaped by what they've searched for or liked. This might be fine for an adolescent searching for DIY projects, sports news, or videos of popular dances, but it can be a huge problem if a teen becomes curious about white supremacy, conspiracy theories, or dieting fads. It's not simply the case that teenagers sometimes fall down the creepy or dangerous digital rabbit holes. Online media is designed to pull users down those rabbit holes. Talk openly with your teen about the fact that digital platforms are manipulative by design. Teens, by their nature, prize their autonomy and don't like to be jerked around by adults. Use this to your and your teen's advantage. Point out that online platforms have one goal: to keep you engaged for as long as possible. They collect your data on what you're interested in and decide what you see, whether it's healthy for you or not. A healthy relationship with technology doesn't hinge just on how teens are using it and what they're looking at. It also comes down to how much space technology takes up in their lives. Here are some basic rules that can make a substantial difference. When first giving adolescents access to digital devices, go slow. Most need no more than the ability to text so that they can connect with their friends. If you decide to allow them to use social media, consider doing it only with the right to monitor their activity closely, at least in the beginning. Don't hesitate to start with rigid rules and limit how much time is being spent socializing online. They're usually so eager to embark on their virtual lives that they will agree to the stringentest parameters just to get started. You can also set boundaries for when and where devices can be used, and observe the same parameters yourself. Keeping meals, short car rides, and family activities tech-free can be a great way to start. Dr. Demore strongly believes that digital technology should not be in anyone's bedroom, especially overnight. Some teenagers need to do their homework in their room, but once it's time to go to sleep, they can be expected to charge their laptops, phones, and any other digital tech elsewhere. There are a few good reasons for this. First, there is some clear evidence from large-scale surveys that having technology in the bedroom overnight undermines sleep, a resource that is already in short supply for most adolescents. Second, using devices behind closed doors at any time of the day or night seems to invite trouble. Teenagers can certainly get into dangerous digital waters while sitting in our kitchen or living room, but overall, it's less likely when we can walk by at any moment. Further, it's all too easy for teens to make dumb or destructive mistakes when they're up late and their neurological breaks are tired. There is also the not-so-small issue of pornography. Online pornography is so accessible that 93% of boys and 62% of girls are exposed to it by age 17. The pornography that is digitally available is raw, graphic, and often centered around themes of violence and degradation. Although teens can feel awful about what they're looking at, they are unable to resist it. Although keeping tech out of your teen's bedroom won't solve the issue of pornography altogether, limiting access to technology overnight can help teens from feeling out of control around content that can leave them feeling very uneasy. Teens, now that they're getting serious about their autonomy, bristle at having to submit to adult authority in school all day long. And just when they're working to develop their freestanding and well-defined identity, they're herded into classes that don't often align with what they see as their brand. On top of all that, teens crave independence, but they often have loads of homework that prevent them from spending their evenings and weekends the way they want to. Dr. Demore encourages us to consider the analogy that sending teens to school is like sending them to a buffet where they're required to try everything being served. As adults, many of us have figured out what we like and what we don't like, and we select for ourselves accordingly. Conversely, teenagers must consume everything on the menu. There is no way they're going to like all of it, and we shouldn't expect that they will. The school as a mandatory buffet metaphor brings neutrality to a loaded topic of academic motivation. It's perfectly okay to require teens to dig into everything, in part because they may discover aspects that they end up liking more than they expected, which could be due to a great teacher or their maturing interests. So, we should encourage them to be open to the possibility that they may enjoy a class that they don't want to take or an experience that they weren't looking forward to. Still, they will have their preferences, and when we acknowledge them and talk openly about them, we're in a better position to help them maintain motivation at school. You may be inclined to tell your teen to fix their attitude, but it's more helpful to start with a matter-of-fact conversation about the nature of school by saying something like this. I get it. You feel about math class the same way I feel about turnips. I eat them only when I have to, which, as an adult, is almost never. No one says you have to like math, but we do need to come up with a solution that makes your class pleasing enough that you can get a decent grade. For some, this validation will help them to get unstuck. But for others, who need more, framing their underperformance as an issue of taste instead of a shortcoming in character can lead to a productive conversation about what might help them be more open to it being served. Solutions might look like working with a study buddy or searching for online videos about what they're learning. If you suspect that there might be a significant barrier, you could consider working with your child's teacher to find a solution that addresses the problem while keeping the shame out of it. It's possible that your adolescent doesn't like any of what's on the menu. School focuses on a narrow range of topics and skills, and it's not unusual for a student to plod through conventional education and then thrive in a career that is not rooted in traditional schooling. If this describes your child, you can do these 3 things. First, support your teen's interests where they lie by finding an after-school program, class, or job that helps develop those skills. 2. Go out of your way to empathize with the fact that it's no fun to spend days, nights, and weekends consuming unappealing food. Appreciate the effort that your teen does put into school and recognize that their doing so may not come easily or naturally. Third, if necessary, get additional help to rule out depression or a substance use disorder. It's important to cultivate strong interests, even if those interests aren't academic. If this isn't happening, you'll want to address the possibility of a broader mental health condition. That's it for part 1. I appreciate your time and encourage you to come back to watch part 2, where I will teach you specific tools to help your teen with emotional regulation.